That big shiny ball that dropped on Times Square has me reflecting on everything that happened this year. And while sure, not all of it was great, I have realized something. We've been treated to unprecedented levels of parity across motorsports. 7 different winners in IndyCar, 7 different winners in Formula 1, even though Max still stomped the living hell out of them. And in NASCAR, 18 race winners, continuing an incredible streak of cutthroat competition that's lasted for the past 4 years. In 2023, we saw 15 different winners. In 2021, we saw 16. But smack dab between them was the most competitive season in recent memory. 2022, when the NASCAR Cup Series saw 19 different race winners. On average, even the very best could only win 2 or 3 out of the 36. That's insane, but it still only managed to tie the record for most winners in a year, as there is one other season that, for good reason, often gets forgotten as the most competitive in the modern era. Of course, we all know why. Dale Earnhardt, guarding his surrogate and his son from the rest of the pack in the closing lap of the Daytona 500, won't even live to see the checkered flag. Many NASCAR fans to this day are still in denial over this, and how could they not be? He was a living legend, one many thought could never be killed. It was the single greatest tragedy, maybe in sports entirely, but certainly the worst to ever strike NASCAR in its over 50-year history. One that undoubtedly changed the course of racing history forever. But what if things went differently? A couple years ago, YouTuber Griffdog created a series called What If Dale Earnhardt Was Still Alive, chronicling years of hypothetical Cup Series seasons had Earnhardt lived to see them, both as a driver and as an owner. I suggest you check it out, it's an interesting watch. And it inspired me to make this video, because even while looking at what actually happened, one thing is clear. That enormous black cloud that hangs over the whole year tends to blanket what, even without the Intimidator, was one of the greatest seasons of racing we'll ever see. Of course, it started out with what should have been the ultimate feel-good finish. After bottling a chance in his qualifying race just 3 days earlier, Michael Waltrip, running his first race for Earnhardt Incorporated and being pushed by his new teammate, Earnhardt Jr., broke a 462-race winless streak by finally capturing win number 1. For all of about 10 minutes, things couldn't be better, and while he waited in victory lane for that famous Earnhardt bear hug, spectators were waiting for him just to climb out of his car. But what if he did? What if his restraints hadn't failed, and he could give Michael that hug after all? A week later, the Rockingham rain forced Sunday to Monday, and the clouds would clear so the sun could shine on Steve Park, who would narrowly outrun defending champ Bobby Labonte to pick up his 2nd consecutive win for DEI and the 2nd win of his career. Next, Jeff Gordon would pick up his first win of the season in Vegas, and with it, the No Bull $5 million bonus. And then came the textbook definition of barn burner in Atlanta, where, in the second closest finish in NASCAR history at that point, Jeff Gordon fell mere inches short of a 2nd consecutive win to rookie Kevin Harvick, making his 3rd career start and getting his 1st career win. But the only reason he was in that car to begin with was to replace Earnhardt. But, as he revealed on Dale Jr.'s podcast just a few years ago, he was going to be running in that race anyways, driving a 3rd entry for Richard Childress Racing. And what if he had done that? If Earnhardt was still in the number 3 and Harvick was forced to the 30, could he still win, much less in his very first start? The following race in Darlington saw Dale Jarrett deliver on a late restart, and young gun Elliott Sadler would take over in the last 70 laps at Bristol to take his 1st career win, becoming the 6th different winner in the first 6 races. Then that streak would be broken with prejudice, as Dale Jarrett would go back to victory lane at Texas and Martinsville. And then came Talladega, where underdog Bobby Hamilton gave Dale Earnhardt's former crew chief, Andy Petrie, his first win as a car owner. But let's get back to Earnhardt, because this was supposed to be a big race for him too. Before this year, he hadn't missed a single race since 1979, over 20 years worth of starts. And in this race today, he should have beaten Terry Labonte's record, a streak of 655 consecutive starts. But what if he did? Could he have reached 656? Could he have become NASCAR's newest Iron Man? To kick off the 2nd quarter of the season, on what would have been Dale Earnhardt's 50th birthday, his greatest rival and even greater friend, Rusty Wallace, made an emotional tribute in California. And then, the following week, a young Tony Stewart made his own tribute in Richmond. Then came the All-Star race, then called the Winston, the first ever edition that wouldn't feature Darrell Waltrip or Dale Earnhardt. As the cars took the green flag, everything seemed in order, but about 10 seconds later, it was clear that something was very wrong.
All the cars are loose down in the corner. The track is wet. It's Gordon, Michael Waltrip, Kevin Harvick car. What a way to start this event.
For some drivers, what a way to end it.
A sudden rain shower in turns 1 and 2 forced multiple drivers out of the race on the very first lap. Or so they thought. Since it was an exhibition event, and for the most part NASCAR's own fault, they decided to let the teams that wrecked out roll out their backup cars, and Jeff Gordon, who started the race on a wrecker, would end up $500,000 richer, tying Dale Earnhardt for the most wins in the Winston. A week later, the Cup Series returned to Charlotte for the Coca-Cola 600, where a part-timer named Ryan Newman took his first career pole, then wrecked. Tony Stewart, after taking part in the Indianapolis 500 just a few hours earlier, became the only driver to run all 1,100 miles across both races, but also wrecked. And Jeff Burton became the 10th different winner of 2001 by not wrecking. The other Jeff would take over in the next two, dominating Dover and just barely edging out Ricky Rudd for the win in Michigan, also claiming the 100th win for Hendrick Motorsports. Rudd would find redemption in the following race at Pocono, and then in Sonoma, Robbie Gordon, who was fixated on a lap car, would give way to Tony Stewart, who would pick up his first of an eventual 8 road course wins. Then came a race that has loomed since February, one that no one could have imagined they'd ever dread so much as the return to Daytona. Teams already struggle to release their cars onto the high banks on account of the damages alone, but with the added knowledge that they had just claimed one of the sport's greatest, some actually considered boycotting the event entirely. Of course, now we know that dread would be short-lived, as in an inverse to the feel-good finish that never was in February, Michael Waltrip would follow Dale Earnhardt Jr. to the line, taking the first race there since his father's death and winning it. This is the one moment that truly couldn't have been more perfect. In a world of underdogs underachieving and comebacks coming short, this was, is, and forever will be a perfect moment. But what if it could have been more perfect? What if, atop the roof of Mikey's car, there was room for one more? Continuing to honor the Earnhardt legacy in the following race, Kevin Harvick scored win number 2 in Chicago, and by now, at the halfway mark of the season, the points lead was all tied up between Jeff Gordon and Dale Jarrett. Jarrett would get the drop on Gordon in the next race, taking the win in Loudon, but would crash out in the week after as Bobby Labonte would take his first win since his championship in Pocono. Just to ensure that his points lead would be safe, Gordon put it upon himself to win the next 2 races at Indy and Watkins Glen. But in their return to Michigan, a new challenger would find his way to the forefront. Driving what is, to this day, my favorite paint scheme in all of NASCAR, Sterling Marlin would score the Micha win in the Coors Light Silver Bullet, nabbing the first win for Dodge in its NASCAR return and breaking a 170-race winless streak for the Tennessean. Next up was a win for Tony Stewart in the Bristol night race, and then a surprise return to victory lane for Jeff Burton's brother, Ward, in Darlington. But back to Jeff Gordon. Despite the 5 races he did win, this had been the 8th time this season that he led the most laps in a race and failed to win it. If he wanted to secure title number 4, he needed to get back to victory lane. So in the next 2 races, he didn't do that. Instead, it would be Ricky Rudd making a miraculous save to win Richmond, and just a week and a half removed from the terrorist attacks of September 11th, Dale Jr. tamed the Monster Mile and gave us the visual encapsulation of America. The next race would see Jeff Gordon finally returning to victory lane in the first ever Cup Series race at Kansas Speedway, and by now, the points lead was pretty much insurmountable, but the battle for second was just heating up. Back in Charlotte for the following race, the Cup Series had a busy day. Most of the broadcast had to be shifted to another channel due to the ongoing live coverage of the invasion of Afghanistan. Sterling Marlin took his second win of the year while his crew member went full Looney Tunes, and a relatively unknown rookie made his first Cup Series start. But he wouldn't be unknown for long, as this young man would go on to define an entire decade of stock car racing, joining Richard Petty and Dale Earnhardt as the winningest champions in the sport's history. But what if they didn't just share the record? What if they had shared the asphalt? Dale Earnhardt had plenty of chances to race the King, and if things had gone differently, could we have seen Jimmy Johnson race the Intimidator? As the final stretch of the season got underway, the intensity only ramped up, as Ricky Craven barely held off Dale Jarrett for his first career win. Dale Jr. would escape the backstretch battle to win Talladega, the site of his father's final win in the year before, and Jeff Burton won his second Phoenix race in a row. Then, after Joe Nemechek took his second career win at Rockingham, Bill Elliott would finally get back to victory lane in Homestead, the first win as an owner for Jeff Gordon's old crew chief, Ray Evernham, and his first Cup win in over 7 years. Between him, Bobby Hamilton, and Sterling Marlin, 2001 saw some of NASCAR's longest droughts come to an end, and even more be kicked off. Although at this point, everyone was more focused on a much shorter drought. It had now been 6 weeks since Jeff Gordon's last win, or top 5 for that matter. And despite that, he could have clinched the championship today. But a 28th place finish meant that the battle would carry forward to the penultimate race in Atlanta. After his teammate Jerry Nadeau ran out of fuel just a half a lap from victory, Jeff Gordon finally locked up his 4th championship, setting himself apart just one step closer to the legends who came before. But one more time, What if things had gone differently? Richard Childress is quoted as saying that Dale and his team were as poised as ever to chase a championship in '01. So what if they did? What if, instead of running away with it, Gordon had to do battle with the number 3 one more time? One last clash of titans. Would it have merely complicated the inevitable? Or could NASCAR have gotten its first 8-time champion? While the season usually ends here, we still have one more race to go. Because of the postponement of the New Hampshire race that was supposed to take place a few days after 9/11, it was instead tacked on to Thanksgiving weekend. And since the championship had already been decided, most expected Jeff Gordon to take one more easy win. That is, until he came under fire from Robbie Gordon, now driving the 31. They're not related, and that would become obvious with his race-winning move.
Oh, Robbie Gordon got into the back of Jeff Gordon.
And Jeff Gordon has damage to the right front fender. He's got damage to the car and lost about 3 or 4 spots.
The season was basically over. He could have just brought it home quietly and called it a day. But as we've come to know far too well, that is not Robbie Gordon's style. And with this win, he would become the 5th first-time winner of '01 and the 19th winner overall. And that was it. A season of endings and even more beginnings, of breaking droughts and starting them, of first-timers and last-timers giving us some of the most awe-inspiring racing we've ever seen. It truly could have been one of, if not the greatest NASCAR season ever, if not for that big, dark cloud. There is one more similarity that these two seasons have. The last Cup Series driver to race with Dale Earnhardt in 2022 was Kurt Busch. In fact, he was the very last person he flipped off. And in 2022, he gave the NASCAR world quite the scare when a seemingly routine crash at Pocono left him with sustained injuries. He still hasn't returned to a race car since this hit, one that, on the surface, didn't look that bad. Though, just like Dale Earnhardt, it was a sobering reminder that things can be worse on the inside than they appear on the outside. That some scars, like the dangers of racing, don't show themselves until it's too late. Now, you've probably spent the last 12 or so minutes wanting to throw something at me through your screen. I keep raising hypothetical questions and not answering them. But that's because there is no answer. There's no way to account for what could have been, because no matter how much we fantasize, we'll never truly know. We can't put a value on life, but we can see how the world fares without it. And while 2001 proved that the sport could carry on and still be as great as it's ever been, one thing can't be denied: that NASCAR, without Dale, it was never the same.